All right, diving right in. Today, we're tackling the 30 Years' War. And let me tell you, this one's a doozy. I mean, we're talking about one of the most brutal, catastrophic conflicts in European history.
Absolutely, a total game changer. And to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of destruction, we're going to think about it like this. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Oh, wow. Okay. I like where this is going. Conquest, war, famine, and death.
Bingo. Those four pretty much sum up the chaos and devastation of this period. It's like biblical levels of destruction.
Chilling stuff. And our sources really set that grim scene right off the bat. They drop us right into Prague in 1621. Imagine being there, witnessing the execution of 27 leaders of the Bohemian Revolt right there in public. For everyday people, this wasn't just politics. This was a sign of something really, really bad about to happen.
No kidding. This was a major turning point. Things went from localized unrest to full-blown continental war. And that's our mission today. In this deep dive, we're breaking down those initial sparks and the crazy escalation. We're talking conquest and war, the first two horsemen.
Okay, let's go. But first things first, where did this all even begin? What ignited this whole powder keg?
Well, our sources point back to Martin Luther, 1517. He nails those 95 theses to the church door, and boom, you've got the Protestant Reformation. It was a total earthquake. It split the Holy Roman Empire right down the middle, Catholics on one side, Protestants on the other.
So hold on, this wasn't just some theological debate, right?
Right.
This religious rift had massive political consequences.
You got it. And then they tried to patch things up, or at least make some rules for coexistence. 1555, Peace of Augsburg. They come up with this principle, cuius regio, eius religio.
Wait, say that again?
Cuius regio, eius religio. It means whose realm, his religion. Basically, whoever's in charge, they get to decide if their territory is Catholic or Lutheran. So at least there's some clarity, right?
Seems like a step towards stability, right? Everyone knows the religious rules where they live.
Yeah, you'd think so, right? But here's the thing. They totally left out the Calvinists. So imagine it like a religious iron curtain. Rulers are picking sides, but Calvinists, they're stuck on the outside. No legal recognition. Talk about tension brewing.
Oh man, talk about a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And this is where the Bohemian crisis comes in, right? How did a regional conflict in Bohemia light the fuse for a Europe-wide war?
Right on. Fast forward to the 17th century. You've got Emperor Matthias, an aging guy with no heir. He's trying to set up his cousin Ferdinand II as the king of Bohemia. Now, Ferdinand is hardcore Catholic. And the Bohemians, they're mostly Protestant. They are not on board.
They weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet for him, were they?
Not even close. Their anxieties reached a boiling point in 1618. Bam. The defenestration of Prague. Talk about making a statement.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no kidding. Okay, for those who don't know, what exactly does defenestration even mean?
Basically, they chuck some Catholic officials right out a window. Now, the funny thing is, the historical accounts get a little wild here. Some Catholics claimed angels swooped in and saved them. Protestants said they landed in a pile of manure. Others suggest they just tumbled down a slope. But regardless of how they landed, the message was crystal clear. Bohemia was rebelling.
Talk about a dramatic exit. So we've got this local uprising. How does it jump from Prague to a full-blown European war?
1620. Battle of White Mountain, it's a turning point. Ferdinand's forces just crushed the Bohemian Protestants, and this was huge. It ended Bohemian independence for like 300 years and cemented Catholic control. This was conquest, leading straight to war.
Wow, what a blow for the Protestants.
Like-
So you said this victory sparked panic across Europe.
Totally. Ferdinand's next moves, well, let's just say they weren't exactly reassuring to the Protestants. They saw Habsburg ambitions everywhere. It was like, okay, Bohemia's gone. Who's next?
So it wasn't just religious fears, right? There were power dynamics at play too.
For sure. One of Ferdinand's biggest power moves was to strip Frederick V, a Protestant, of his title as elector. This was a massive deal. Electors had a huge say in choosing the Holy Roman Emperor, and Ferdinand just hands the title over to Maximilian of Bavaria, a Catholic. People were outraged. It was a total breach of protocol, and it wasn't just symbolic. It shifted the balance of power big time.
Okay, so other European powers start seeing their own interests at stake.
Right. The Netherlands, they were already fighting Habsburg Spain for independence. They jump in to support Frederick. Then you have Great Britain. James Thurce's daughter was married to Frederick, so England gets pulled in too. And then you've got the Habsburgs in Spain and Austria. They're loving this. They're thinking, hey, let's expand. Suddenly, everyone's involved.
The battle lines are forming. But here's a twist. Our source mentions France, a Catholic nation, siding against the Catholic Habsburgs. That seems kind of strange. What was their game?
This is where it gets interesting. France, under the Bourbons, they weren't crazy about the Habsburgs having all that power. Spain and Austria, those are two pretty big neighbors, they were basically getting squeezed. So even though they were Catholic, they teamed up against the Habsburgs. They were thinking strategy, balance of power, not just religion.
It's wild how these historical conflicts are never simple black and white.
Mm.
And amidst all this political chess and war, what about the human cost? The source talks about the Magdeburg massacre, and that sounds horrific.
Yeah, Magdeburg, 1631, a real low point. The Catholic League, they lay siege to the city. When they finally break through, it's a massacre. Fires everywhere, something like 20,000 civilians slaughtered. It's hard to even fathom that level of suffering. And it shows how civilians, everyday people, they were caught in the crossfire.
20,000.
Yeah.
The number's just, it's hard to grasp.
Mm.
It really brings home the human tragedy beyond all the politics and battles.
It does, and unfortunately, Magdeburg was just one example. Our sources make it clear. The 30 Years' War was a humanitarian disaster on an epic scale. The civilian death toll from violence, starvation, disease, it dwarfed the military deaths. We're talking 7-1.
7-1. That's just mind-blowing.
It is. Some areas in Central Europe lost over half their population. The Holy Roman Empire as a whole, they lost about 20% of their people. It took them a century to recover. That's the kind of devastation we're talking about.
Wow, it paints a bleak picture. But what else contributed to such a level of destruction?
Well, think about the Holy Roman Empire like this. A body with a bunch of heads, each one pulling in a different direction. Seriously, the empire was so fragmented. You had princes, counts, bishops, free cities, all these independent groups, each with their own agenda, some even fighting each other. There was no strong central authority. So small conflicts, they just exploded. It was chaos.
So it wasn't one unified state at war. It was like this jumbled mess of little entities getting dragged into the conflict. And what about the religious tension? How did the Calvinists who got left out of the Peace of Augsburg, how did that play into the conflict?
Yeah, that was a major sticking point. They were stuck in this no man's land, no legal protection. They faced persecution, even from other Protestants. It was a constant source of instability, ready to be exploited.
It's easy to think that, without modern weapons, wars back then were less destructive, but our sources show just how brutal things were, even with the technology of the time.
Oh, yeah, totally. Sure, they didn't have machine guns and tanks, but those battles were still incredibly deadly. Think huge pike formations, guys firing muskets from point-blank range, and sieges like Magdeburg. Those were brutal. Civilians trapped inside, no escape.
The Four Horsemen, that's not just a metaphor. It really captures how one thing led to another. Conquest and war, they set the stage for what came next. The famine, the disease.
Exactly. It's a domino effect. We've talked about how those initial power grabs and military escalations, how they paved the way for famine and disease to sweep through, further decimating the population.
This deep dive has been a sobering look at the beginning of the 30 Years' War. It's shocking how these local issues and power struggles spiraled out of control into such a massive catastrophe.
Absolutely. And here's a question for you, our listeners. How did those deep religious and political divisions of the early 17th century escalate into such a devastating conflict? And what lessons can we take from this, even today, about the roots of conflict?
A lot to think about, for sure. And this is just the first part of our deep dive into the 30 Years' War. Join us next time as we explore famine and death, the full scope of this historical apocalypse, and how it shaped Europe for generations to come.